So the flow, I only heard of this notion just a couple of months ago, and I've been thinking about it a lot. And, in the world, we have to settle for moments of the flow, or you get a certain task, or we have an experience here and there, variously, of this phenomena of having the mind single-mindedly focused and time kind of falling away, and you just become so engrossed in what you're doing that there's just the flow, this sense of being exactly where you need to be in the moment. And it caught my imagination because that's been my idea of what my spiritual life should be, to be in this flow, to where the world is just going on and things are coming along effortlessly, accepting them as they are, seeing them in their perfection, and just living in that human bliss, no anxiety, no stress, no worry. That reggae, I guess, ideal of life. And so to jump into it, I was kind of asking myself, well, how would I intend to get there? How would I intend to live with the Divine Mother all the time and to spend in constant communion, in that constant state of peace and well-being? So I was reading this very interesting thing about in the Rig Veda, one of the earliest scriptures that we have in the world, actually. And one of the first things said is that the human body is a temple of God. One who kindles the light of awareness within gets that true light. The sacred flame of your inner shrine is constantly bright. The experience of unity is the fulfillment of human endeavor. The mysteries of life are revealed. I took that and I thought, what a beautiful scripture to be the oldest one that I know, that I've learned. And it's an idea that's repeated through the ages, this idea of your body being a temple. And when I started thinking about that notion and trying to anticipate what it would be to have that be real, to where I actually dwelled in my body as if it was a temple, I began to realize that really that would be the flow. That would be the center of peace, the center of harmony, the center of an authenticity, a reality. Because really the flow is exactly that. It's an authenticity. It's being truly human. It's being who you really are, who you know yourself to be, who you struggle to be. It's the answer to all of your desires, even the ones that you haven't quite sorted out yet, that seem to be for things out there. Everything out there that you desire, as we know, is just a reflection of what's inside, a reflection of what you already have, what you already experience, what you already are. And the proof of that is when you feel that love. Where do you feel it? When you see someone that you're in love with, your child, your spouse, a friend, you feel it within yourself, right? It's a love that grows within, and this person becomes a reflection of that. You feel it more strongly when they're in your presence. But we often think that it's because of my wife that I'm happy, or I'm feeling that love, or because of my husband that I'm feeling such a great joy. But it's not. That joy still remains generated within you and is simply being reflected by something outside of yourself. So living in the flow is to know yourself to be the source of all that you need or want. Living in the flow is knowing that your contentedness and satisfaction in life is going to come from the inner direction and not from the outer direction. Swami Nikhilananda in 1936 writes this beautiful paragraph here about the nature of you and of me. And I wanted to frame this discussion in the contents of this paragraph. He says, man is divine by nature. So if you're wondering what you are divine. You have that divine spirit within. And we'll touch on that quite a bit this morning. Either as created in the image of God, or as a spark of Him, or as one with Him. The essential nature of man can never lose this perfection. So this understanding, this freedom of life, of being who you are, is always waiting within you, always sitting there within, to be let out in freedom and in clarity. He says, there is no such thing as sin which can change the quality of the soul. So it's not that there's no sin, not any wrongdoing or confusion or ignorance in the world, but there's nothing in this world that can pollute you, that can pollute the soul, as well as there's nothing in this world that can be added to the soul, that you can bring into yourself. You know, that great understanding that when you're born into the world, you're born naked with nothing. And when you go out of this world, you again leave with nothing, you know. And this understanding that we're not here to get, since you come in with nothing and you leave with nothing, the point of life can't be acquisition because it's temporary and for a very short time. So this world has to be about something else. It has to be about perhaps communion with the beloved, with that nature. Perhaps the idea of giving or manifesting that nature into the world freely, without ego, to give love, to give acceptance, to give encouragement, to be full and overflowing in your own self so that you have something to give. He says, God exists in us as this potentiality and possibility. An action is called good or moral that helps us to discover this hidden divinity. And an action is immoral or bad, which conjures up before us this appearance of the manifold, when that one without a second seems to appear as disparate things, multiple things, seems to be hidden behind this veil, not able to be seen. And it's going into the senses for your satisfaction, going into the mind for your satisfaction, that causes this confusion, that makes you see multiplicity instead of seeing your beloved, that makes you see human beings as separate and apart from you, instead of seeing that seed of love that is behind you, behind your mind, behind your personality, behind your body, that pure you before it gets pressed through the limiting mind, before it gets shined through a limiting body or an adjunct. And that those limiting adjuncts are what make us anxious. They're what make us afraid. They're what make us small. And if we believe them and take them on to be ourself and forget this divine seed, this divine nature that's within, that becomes a life that's got a twist in it. A life of stress, a life of pain, a life of depression, a life of anger, a life of disempowerment. And so we want to escape that because we want to live in the flow. The scene here next is the master, Sri Ramakrishna. He's on a boat and he's talking with the devotees about this flow, about this inner nature of being. And M, who's the recorder of the gospel, shares it like this. Ramakrishna is talking. The yogi seeks to realize the Paramatman, that supreme soul. His ideal is the union of the embodied soul and this supreme soul. He withdraws his mind from sense objects and tries to concentrate it on the Paramatman. Therefore, during this first stage of his spiritual discipline, he retires into solitude with an undivided attention, practices meditation in a fixed posture. But the reality is one and the same. The difference is only in name. He who is Brahman is verily Atman, and again he is Bhagavan. He is Brahman to followers of the path of knowledge, Paramatman to the yogis, and Bhagavan to the lovers of God. So this unity, this unification inside, is the very fulfillment of virtue. It's where all virtues take you. Anything that leads you toward that oneness, toward that idea of unity and harmony with everything as one, is virtue. Anything that takes you away from that harmony, anything that takes you away from oneness and leads you into a world of multiplicity is vice. And they're only called virtue and vice for that reason. One is helpful to you reaching this state of divine living, a life that's fulfilling and beautiful and giving. And that life which is vice, that life which is built on the idea of weakness, an idea of life that makes you think that something out there is going to make you whole. Something out there is going to give something to you. But this is breaking the rule. This is breaking your own nature. It's breaking your own understanding and leading you into ignorance to believe that there's something outside of yourself that's going to make you whole. Why? Because this soul, this divine self, the watcher of your mind, the watcher of your body, that which is silently witnessing all of your senses all of the time, has been the same within you through all of your entire life. We talk about this all the time because it's fundamental to understand your nature and to be able to sort it out in your meditations. What is me? What am I? Who is it that is looking at my mind and watching my thinking? Who is it that my mind is talking to when it speaks and when it thinks? Who is it that the birds sing to when I hear them? Who is it that touches me, and who is being touched when my body tells me that it's been touched? Who is this listener that's within you? To find and know that inner self is to find your inner peace. It's to find your confidence. It's to find your strength. It's to find your bliss and the source of all the love that you experience in your life. And so the master is on this boat talking to this group of devotees about this idea of withdrawing your mind from the senses and to concentrate it on this supreme Atman, this supreme self within, before it gets pulled into its separateness, its idea of being a body and being a mind, and by that accident, thinking itself to be weak, thinking itself to be small, thinking itself to be needy. And then M breaks out of the scene and starts to describe what's going on. He says the steamer had been going toward Calcutta, but the passengers, with their eyes fixed on the master and their ears given to his nectar-like words, were oblivious of its motion. Dakshineshwar, with its temples and gardens, was left behind. The paddles of the boat churned the waters of the Ganges in a murmuring sound, but the devotees were indifferent to all this. Spellbound, they looked on the great yogi, his face lighted with a divine smile, his countenance radiating love, his eyes sparkling with joy. A man who had renounced everything for God and who knew nothing but God. Unceasing words of wisdom flowed from his lips. A beautiful scene, a beautiful description, but it's more than that. Because when I read this, Mother kicked me right in the side of the head, as she does sometimes, and says, look at that, did you see what he just did? What did M just do? He gave us the theory, he gave us the philosophy from the mouth of the master, saying that the yogi seeks to realize the Paramatman. He withdraws his mind from sense objects. He retires into solitude with undivided attention. So he gives us the principle. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to find that self within that's implicated by all of the change without. We're trying to find and become aware of the watcher that never changes, never moves, is never discontent, never needs anything. We're trying to become aware of that silent, harmonious, established, unchanging self. That is all that we need. And as he says this, M pulls out of the group and looks at the situation as a whole, and he gives us the example of what it looks like with the devotees right here in the boat. What does it say? He says they were sitting there in front of the master with their eyes fixed on him. They were oblivious to the motion of the boat. They were oblivious to the changing of the world outside. They were fixed with their eyes on the master, and they were indifferent to the churning of the waters of the Ganges, to the paddles of the boat being stroked. So all of the karmas going on in the world, they're oblivious to them. Why? Because they're sitting there looking at this divine yogi, a light in the face with of a divine smile, his countenance radiating love, his eyes sparkling with joy, a man who had renounced all for God, who knew nothing but God. Unceasing words of wisdom flowed from his lips. This is the deity within the chapel of your own temple, within the heart of your own body. Your body is that temple, and it enshrines this master. This master, whether he's in the form of Buddha, the form of Jesus, the form of Rama, the form of Krishna, this master who sits within you, perfect in knowledge, radiating love, a pure love, a love that's not diminished by need, not inspired by reward, not metered out as if it's a limited substance, but this love which is before you, before your personality, before your mind, this love, this perfect love that is the watcher of your thinking, that is the watcher and feeler of your body, that gets all of this news from the outside. And it's constantly radiating this love, constantly radiating this beauty. But it's in a silent space because it's unchanging. And we spend all of our time in the senses where the colors flash and the sounds honk and the words mean, and all of these things keep us captivated in the world of the limited, in the world of the separated, in the world of the small, the world of the finite. And we forget, after we've stepped out of this silent center, how to get back. Because how do you get back to something that doesn't call your attention? Something that's unchanging, something that's infinite, something that's in everything, and yet has its center within you. How do we get back to this place, to this temple? So to enter the temple of your own self, Saint Basil the Great, he was a Eastern Orthodox monk from the Middle Ages, he says, "An intellect undistracted by the external things and not dispersed through the senses among worldly things returns to itself, and from itself it ascends to God by an unerring path." So he tells us to enter this temple within, you have to become undistracted by the external things. Now, how do you do that? When you go within, what does that mean? How do you get within? Aren't you already within, But you don't live within, right? You're living without. If someone asks you to describe yourself, you always describe yourself from the outside in. You never describe yourself from the inside out. You see, and that's the change that has to take place to make that transition from ordinary human to saint. It's to begin to see the world from the inside out, because only from the inside out can you see yourself in everyone. Once you know the divine nature within you, you can no longer help seeing it in everyone around you. And why do I say that? Because you don't know anything about anyone around you. Even your closest friend, you have no access to their mind. You have no access to their state of being, to their history. So you are always projecting your own self on everything in the world. Everything that you think you know about someone else is only what you know about yourself projected on them. So that's why it's of fundamental importance for you to understand your nature, to know who you are, so that you can accurately see others. And when you know this divine love within, and you begin to suspect it in others, that love wakes up, and that flow begins to happen. As you begin to assume love, you assume peace. So be undistracted by these external things. Use them as a tool, because you can't put them away. They're always there. Even when you close your eyes, there's noises and sounds, and there's the body. What do you do with them? Use them to implicate that unchanging nature, right? You can see change only when you're not part of it, only when you're the observer of it. And you can see all of the change in the world, which implies that you're not a part of any of the changing in the world, that you are an observer, you are an outside watcher of this world, much like your sleeping body is of the dream at night, watching everything happen and yet nothing happening, watching yourself go everywhere and yet not traveling, watching the unfolding of story after story in your mind and yet nothing occurring. This is the nature of the world. We discover the realm of God, St. Basil says, when the intellect turns and enters the heart. The kingdom of God is within you. When man returns to himself, he feels uncontained longing for the yearning of this pristine beauty which is found in the name and person of your beloved. In the name and person of your beloved, that which is worshipped on your shrine. All of the external temples that we've created in the world are just a model of what's within. They're a help on the outside because most of us are living on the outside. And we walk into these temples to feel our solace, to find that peace, to get a moment to pull into our center, not knowing that this temple we've created out here is modeled perfectly after the already existing temple within here, within you. And when you know that temple, you'll know that peace. In his lecture on the powers of the mind, Swami Vivekananda goes on. He says, the less the thought of the body, the better. For it is the body that drags us down. It is attachment, identification, which makes us miserable. That is the secret, to think that I am the spirit and not the body, and that the whole of this universe, with all of its relations, with all of its good and all of its evil, is but a series of paintings, scenes on a canvas, of which I am the witness. To enter this temple, to enter within your own self, you have to completely not even allow thought to move in your mind. Don't let the senses get into the mind and cause vibration, cause thoughts to arise. And when they do, don't even pay attention to them. He says here later on, this is Nikitas Shtitatos. He says, when you notice thoughts arising and accosting you, do not look at them, even if they are not bad, but keeping the mind firmly in the heart, call to your beloved, and you will soon sweep away the thought and drive out all of these instigators, invisibly scorching and flogging them with this divine name. Thus teaches John of the Ladder, saying, with the name of Jesus, flog the foes, for there is no surer weapon against them, either on earth or in heaven. So this mantra that you've been given, this name of the beloved, this name of God, that you've been given to repeat in your practice, that is the strongest weapon for being able to drive out, in the saints' words here, those demons and those minions that are trying to pull you out of yourself, to distract you from your true nature. So to get into this inner self, you have to put all of those things aside. By being firmly established here, put your center of awareness in your heart. And keep your eyes gazing at that lovely yogi with those bright eyes of that infinite love, with that beautiful spirit of constant giving. A man, a woman who has given up everything for the Lord, for love. Given up everything for love. Given up everything for that pristine intelligence that lies within. Given up everything for that peace that radiates from the center of your being. This is the temple in the heart, and this is where we need to go. He says, my brother, pray with simplicity and peace, calmly and plainly, like the gentle breeze, like your breath. Only concentrate all of your emotion, all of your will around the holy name of the divine. Let his name penetrate your soul like a drop of oil saturates a cloth. Surrender all your being and lock it inside this name. He goes on, St. Gregory of Sinai adds, with the help of prayer, ignore all thoughts, whether of the senses or of the mind, for silence means cutting off all thoughts, except the most divine, which come from spirit, lest in accepting the former as good, we lose what is greater. So this notion of stepping into thoughts, thoughts, can be a distraction. It's better in prayer to use your mind as an ear as opposed to an action. To learn to use all of your senses as an ear to the divine, not as a tool of the ego to do or to get or to plan or to take or to earn, but to turn the mind itself into an ear, listening for that divine voice within, in that stillness. And in that reflected mind, that still mind, God can be seen. That's the promise of Raja Yoga and Jnana Yoga. That if you can still that mind, that moon which is reflected there will appear in its wholeness. You will see that this multiplicity is one without a second. When that mind gets disturbed, and it's always two things that disturb that mind, the ideas of me and mine. When you add me and mine, those two little fingers tap that still water of the mind, and it becomes churning little wavelets. And what happens to that reflection of the moon? It becomes the multiplicity. It becomes unrecognizable as a singularity and just looks like a million shards of light flashing and moving and changing, very much like the world you're looking at right now. Calm the mind. Find that silence. Shut down the outer world of the body and the mind and its thoughts, and God will become apparent to you. That which was obvious will become apparent at last, and you will finally enter the shrine of your own heart. This calmness is rather difficult to find. There's a lovely story that, it's a long story, but it's a fun story, so I'm going to share it even though it only has one sentence that I'm interested in making a point with. It's the story of Emma Calve. She was a French opera singer, and she went to see Vivekananda, and this is the story of her meeting that she writes about in her book called My Life. An appointment was arranged for me, and when I arrived at Vivekananda's house, I was immediately ushered into his study. Before going, I had been told not to speak until he had addressed me. When I entered the room, therefore, I stood before him in silence for a moment. He was seated in a noble attitude of meditation. His robe of saffron yellow was falling in straight lines to the floor. His head, swathed in a turban, bent forward, his eyes on the ground. After a brief pause, he spoke without looking up. "My child," he said, "what a troubled atmosphere you have about you. Be calm. It is essential." Then in a quiet voice, untroubled and aloof, this man, who did not even know my name, talked to me of my secret problems and my anxieties. He spoke of things that I thought were unknown even to my nearest friends. It seemed miraculous, supernatural. "How do you know all of this?" I asked at last. "Who has talked of me to you?" He looked at me with his quiet smile, as though I were a child who had asked a foolish question. "No one has talked to me," he answered gently. "Do you think that is necessary? I read you like I read an open book." He had that absolutely calm mind. So the disturbances that he felt around him were not coming from his own inner self, from his own anxieties, his own stress, his own world. But the ripples in the water that he would feel then, because of the calmness of his own, were the ripples of the water of the people around him, the minds around him. And in that ability, in that space of being, which is not a supernatural thing, it's our real nature, it's our real self, that empathy expands, that knowledge of others expands, not because you know about them, but because you've learned of your own nature, and you know it in others. In The Art of Living, this Stoic philosopher Epictetus writes, "Happiness and freedom begin with a clear understanding of one principle. Some things are within our control and some things are not." Very simple thing to put forward. So he's trying to give us this access to this calmness, to this clarity, to help us settle our mind. And he's saying that the clear principle is to know that some things you can change and some things you can't change. It is only after you have faced up to this fundamental rule and learned to distinguish between what you can and cannot control that inner quality and outer effectiveness become possible. Within your control are your opinions, your aspirations, your desires, and the things that you don't like or that repel you. These areas are quite rightly your concern because they are directly subject to your influence. You always have a choice about the contents and the character of your own self. You always have a choice about what you let in. Many people are very conscious about what they eat. I'm a vegan, or I'm a vegetarian, or I eat only meat, or I'm on the keto diet, or I'm on that, all these things. And so much so that they put the ingredients in everything that we eat. But what you eat comes in through all of your senses, not just through your mouth. And all of them affect the stillness within. All of them affect that harmony and that tranquility that is naturally yours. So when you put things on the shrine, which means you take things into your temple through your senses. Be very aware of what you're putting in there and what you're allowing in there. Are they things that should be brought into your temple? Are they things that should be worshipped and should be laid before a God of love, a God of intelligence, a God of existence? Are they things worthy of you? That spirit, that supreme self, unchanging, watching this story of love that is the world unfold. Struggle only with those things that are in your control, and the things that are not in your control, let them go. It's very important. I think I mentioned this last time I was here, that one of our big dilemmas in this world is this media that we have available to us, this internet that covers the entire planet. It gets us all upset and all worked up about things that we can't do anything about. You're not the president of any of the countries being listed. You're not, Mother has not given you any authority to affect those things. So how healthy is it to take on these deeper concerns, to take on these troubles from all around the world, while being ignorant of the things going on in your own city council, while being ignorant of the things that are happening in your neighbor's house, in your friend's house, and the people that are around you? So one of the ways to come to this level of calmness, this level of control, is to let go of the things you can't change. Don't pay so much attention to them. Do what you can in the things that Mother has given you responsibility for. If you're just a teenage boy living in your house and your authority literally is probably less than the length of your arms, make your bed in the morning, clean your room in the morning, write cards to your friends, give your mother a hug, write a note to your dad saying thanks, for all the stuff you've given me. Bring your mind down to the world you live in, to the world that you can affect. Be the saint in your neighborhood who knows who's sick on the block and is the first one there with that bowl of soup for them. Who can tell when the old woman next door can't mow her lawn, and so he pulls out his own lawnmower and mows her lawn. Who's aware that the person down the house, 2 houses down, has lost their job and takes a dinner to the family. Be that person, because you've begun to pay attention to the world you live in, that you can affect, that Mother has given you to take care of. And if we all do that little by little, those distant problems, which have basically just angered us and caused stress, will fall into their proper place, will fall into their proper importance, and will eventually be touched by this ever-increasing circle of someone who has learned to live in the temple that they are. Remember that if you think you have free reign over things that are naturally beyond your control, or if you attempt to adopt the affairs of others as your own, your pursuits will be thwarted, and you will become frustrated. You will become anxious. You will become a fault-finding person. So bring it in. This is how we find the calmness in the inner shrine. Quite often when you go into an active temple or an active shrine in the world, that's one of the things most people notice right away. God, it's so still in here. I remember the first time my mother came to visit me at the temple up in San Francisco, and I took her into the old temple, which has been there over 100 years, and some of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna actually taught and meditated in that temple. She knew nothing of any of that, really didn't have a big concern for spiritual things at that level. But the first thing she said when I took her into that chapel, into that temple, she stood there and she said, "My God, I have never felt such a still place in all my life." That stillness is what is in your inner shrine, in your inner temple. And as valuable as it is to you when you walk into a shrine or a temple in the world of the senses, so much more important is your ability to find your way into the chapel of the heart, to find your own peace, to find your own stillness, to find your own harmony. That presence of the divine, of your beloved, is what builds that atmosphere. the master is talking to Shrish, one of the devotees, and he says to Shrish, "What is your idea about what is most essential in life?" And Shrish answers, a pretty good religious answer actually. He says, "Well, God exists, and he alone does everything, but the attributes we ascribe to him are not the right ones. How can a man conceive of him? His nature is infinite." And the master responds very interestingly. He says, "What need is there of your counting the number of leaves, the branches in an orchard? You've come to the orchard to eat mangoes. Do that and be happy. The aim of human birth is to love God, realize that love, and be at peace." So this idea of eating the mangoes, it's like he asks Shrish this question, what is the most essential thing in life? And Shrish has a good answer, a good philosophical answer. Well, God's everything. He's doing everything. And, how can I really conceive of him? He's so much bigger than the mind. And the master gives him that answer. Look, why are you counting leaves? Why are you counting the branches in the orchard? You're here to enjoy God, to fall in love with the divine. So when you go into your inner shrine, it's not that you're trying to attain something. You're not trying to do something. You're not trying to get something. You're going to your inner shrine to enjoy the divinity that dwells there, to enjoy God. And what's another name for God? Because we've really messed that one up, in a sense. What is God? God is love. God is love. God is intelligence. God is existence. So when you go into your inner shrine, you're there to partake of those three things. You're there to enjoy their already ripe existence by keeping your mind focused on them, by putting away thoughts that are vibrating, by putting away the outside world that's changing and always will. You sit there in that silence and you enjoy the love that you're able to give and the love that you're able to feel. You become aware of the beauty that you know even without having been taught. And you know how to manifest that beauty. You become aware of the voice of wisdom, that voice of intelligence that is within. And when you remove the smallness of body and the smallness of mind from that intelligence, it becomes deep wisdom. It becomes powerful wisdom for you. It becomes those words of nectar that draw you in and inspire you away from the world of the changing. So that when you're walking down that busy street or you're walking down the center of the mall, you're no longer out here looking at all the things you don't own but could own, looking at all the beautiful people you don't know but could know, this constant pulling and churning at your desires. Instead of living out there and getting exhausted at the end of the day at the mall, you live on this side. And you become aware of the watcher who's watching all of this. And you're becoming aware of the distance that's between all of this and the watcher. And you become aware that all of this is out here and can serve a body and can serve a mind, but doesn't touch the spirit. Can't touch the spirit. And you'll know the fullness of that spirit, and you'll know the need to have nothing, to desire nothing, to long for nothing, but that establishment in love, that establishment in wisdom, that sitting in the wonder of being, that is to be in the shrine of your own heart, this body, the temple of that divinity, which is you. Brother Lawrence, in his book, The Practice of the Presence of God, it said of him, he exercised himself in the knowledge and love of God, resolving to use his utmost endeavor to live in a continual sense of his presence, and if possible, to never forget him again. That when he had thus in prayer filled his mind with great sentiments of that infinite being, he went to his work appointed in the kitchen. There, having first considered severally the things his office required, and when and how each thing was to be done, he spent all the intervals of his time, as well as before and after his work, in prayer. As he proceeded in his work, he continued his familiar conversation with his Maker, imploring his grace and offering to him all of his actions. When he had finished, he examined himself to see if he had discharged his duty. If he had found he'd done it well, he returned his thanks to the Beloved. If otherwise, he asked for pardon, and without being discouraged, he set his mind right again and continued his exercise of the presence of God, as if he had never deviated from it. So to feel that presence within is an exercise, because we're very accustomed to not feeling it, to ignoring it, or to describing it differently. A lot of times I won't jump into that actually, but this notion of coming into that inner space, into that prayer, into that continual presence of God, he gives us some really good pointers here. He says that when he had filled his mind with prayer, filled his mind with the love of God, filled his mind with focusing on that infinite love that's within and letting it radiate by putting it, by touching it. It's giving it. It's like putting your wire on a battery. That presence of God within you is the battery that drives your life. If you were to clear out your mind and clear out and forget the notion of a body and its identity, your identity with it, you would naturally live like a Buddha. You would naturally live like a Jesus. You would naturally live like a Krishna. It's only the mind and its idea that it's infected you with being a body that's small, that can't have, that gets hungry, that gets uncomfortable, that gets old, that's constantly wanting and trying to take. You understand that's the body. That's not me. Just like the body you had in your dream last night was not you. But it's an interesting study to realize how easily you moved into that body last night in your dream, how effortlessly you became convinced that the world you were experiencing was real, how you actually believed that what you were doing was actually happening, and that things were actually being accomplished, that there was actually a story and actually a narrative of something unfolding, only to find out when you wake up in the morning, there was nothing. Nothing was accomplished. Nothing was done. Nothing was moved. And you are established in that same self. Now that self has become this body. Be aware of that. See how easily you can move from one body to another, from one identity to another, and learn something about the nature of the world you live in, that you are in fact doing that at this very moment, inhabiting something that you will walk away from at some point, or float away from, or whatever happens in that sense. You're going to leave it behind, and chances are you're going to leave it behind in a condition that you're really happy to be leaving it behind in, moving on to something greater. So know this. And he says, once you've become filled with this idea, filled with this reality, with this wisdom, with this knowledge of the nature of yourself and the nature of this world, when you've stopped being fooled into thinking there's something to take, and you've begun to focus on what flows out of you, an infinite source of love that is so necessary, that the rest of this world is so hungry for, and you having an infinite well within you will finally be the person that you were born to be. And when he goes and proceeds with his work, he sits there and he looks at everything that has to be done very calmly, orders it out, and then with the name of God in his mind, he goes and everything he touches, he offers at first. Everything that he does, he offers as his worship, doing everything excellently, not to get what the actual work is about, but the action itself becomes worship, becomes ritual, becomes his offering to the beloved. So we see that he puts that there, and then when he's done with the day, when he's done working, he sits down and thinks about, how did I do today? Did I keep my mind on God? Did I keep my mind centered in love? Was I centered in the heart? Was I undistracted by all of the minions of noise in my mind, all of the things that were bothersome or troublesome to the ego? And then he says if you didn't, he just apologized and just put his mind back on love and moved forward. He didn't get discouraged, didn't beat himself up about it, didn't decide that meant he was an awful person, so that he took on now a new identity as a failure. It's not like that, right? It's always knowing your nature so that these things that happen to you don't affect you and in that space. You have a refuge. And when God says, take refuge in me alone, that's what he's talking about. If you unfold for a moment that notion of Advaita, that one without a second from your dhoti, like Thakur says, Ramakrishna says, to take Advaita, that notion of one without a second. For the devotee, it's not super helpful because you're like, well, if I'm God, who am I praying to, right? If I'm God, who do I love? What's going on here? So he says, in the meantime, until you get that ego taken care of, to where you think the I that you speak is the I of your body-mind, and know that this I is the I am of God, Once you come to know that, well, you're ready to roll your dhoti a little bit, take out that knowledge of oneness, and become inspired by it. Become inspired by knowing that that deity in the shrine is your nature, and it is God. And as long as you see yourself separate from it, it's not the thing that is unreal. Your notion of you as the separate self is unreal. That in the end of this game, it is not God who disappears because everything is you. It's you that disappears. That allows everything to be one. You know, that sense of ego, that sense of separateness, that comes from listening to the noise of the mind and identifying with the senses of the body and letting those things tell you who you are. Thus, by rising after my falls and by frequently renewed acts of faith and love, I am come to a state wherein it would be as difficult for me not to think of God as it was at first when I had to accustom myself to it. So this again, his two things that he did in his life to get to this place of constant remembrance, of constant peace in his own shrine of the heart. By rising after my falls, I just get up. I fail. I'll fail 1,000 times. I don't count them. I don't remind myself of them. I don't define myself by them. I do not identify myself as being them. I get up and I try again. And by frequently renewed acts of faith, which means trying things that I'm not sure I can do, reaching for things of divine that I'm not sure I can accomplish, I do them. I step out and make the attempt. Acts of faith and acts of love. That wonderful bumper sticker, random acts of kindness. Get to it. Get to it. It's nice to read it in a bumper sticker. It's better to do it. It's a delightful experience of life to be kind, consciously. Not just accidentally as things happen during the day, but to go out on your walk in the evening. Instead of just going for a walk and just letting your mind take you wherever it takes you and all the sights and scenes grabbing your attention and giving you your walk, set your attention beforehand, like Brother Lawrence. Say, Mother, I'm going for a walk today. I'm going to take $5 with me. I'm going to give it to somebody. Please make sure that the person out there who needs $5 meets me today. And then you go for your walk. And now your purpose in walking is not distracting. It's an effort of love. It's opening your eyes to the world you live in and looking for service to give, to offer. So like Brother Lawrence, when you wake up in the morning, there's a wonderful quote here that I didn't mention earlier from, where was it? This is a quote from Nikitas Chitatos, that Greek Orthodox monk. He says, in the morning, force your mind to descend from the head to the heart and hold it there, calling ceaselessly in the mind and soul, Lord, have mercy on me, until you are tired. So this idea of coming out of the head space, coming out of this mind as an identifying source of who you are. He's saying, come out of that and come to the heart. What's in the heart? The heart is the source of all love. It's the source of all compassion. It's the source of the presence of God. It's the source of your own presence. The Upanishads sort of hint that there's a thumb-sized hole there, perhaps, through which pure love, the essence of the divine, of God, comes pouring into the finite world. And if you could get your ego out of the way, people would see God in you. They would know you to be that divinity, like a Buddha or a Jesus or a Rama. So let that water flow, that water of love, let it flow freely. Just you as the watcher, become aware of it. Don't get in its way. Respond to that impetus of love that's in you all the time. And go out there and plan. Open yourself up to it. Take your walk and say, I'm going on this walk in order to find somebody to serve. I'm going into the grocery store today to find someone to be kind to. I'll pick up some groceries incidentally as well. But my mind is going to be looking around for someone that I can reach a top shelf for, or the person at the counter that doesn't have enough money to cover the groceries, or for the little kid whose mother can't afford to get him some gum, and I'll get him some gum, or I'll pay her bill, or I'll carry his groceries. But you take a look at life and you understand what you are, and you begin to manifest that. Not the desires of a half-crazed mind, not the desires of an ever-melting and decaying body, but the desires and inspirations of an immortal self, a self that's ever free, a self that's ever pure, a self that is beloved of its own nature, a soul that's infinite, that can give and give and give and never lose a thing for it. Enter this shrine that's within you. Enter this secret place that is within you. We have to cover everything with the Lord himself, not by a false sort of optimism, not by blinding our eyes to evil, says Vivekananda, but by really seeing God in everything. Thus, we have to give up the world. And when the world is given up, what remains? God. What is meant? You can have your wife. It doesn't mean that you have to abandon her, but that you are to see God in that wife. Give up your children. What does that mean? To turn them out the door? No, certainly not. That's diabolical. It's not religion. But see God in your children. So in everything, in life and in death, in happiness and in misery, the Lord is equally present. The whole world is full of the Lord. Open your eyes and see him. This is what the Vedanta teaches. Give up the world which you have conjectured, because your conjecture was based upon a very partial experience, upon very poor reasoning, and upon your own weakness. Give it up. The world we have been thinking of so long, the world to which we have been clinging to for so long, is a false world of your own creation. Give it up. Open your eyes and see that as such it never existed. It was a dream. What existed was the Lord himself. Sit in your shrine, the shrine you carry with you everywhere. Learn how to find your way into it through that calmness, that peace, and that renunciation. Renunciation of what? The false world that you've imagined, that you've conjectured. And see what? The Lord in every pair of eyes. The Lord in every beautiful scene, in every ugly scene. Understand that it is the Lord, the dreamer, whose mind is used by each one of us to see light, to give love, to recognize beauty. Sit in that temple, look at the Lord, stay centered. That's the flow. It was meant to be lifelong. It was meant to be forever, not little snippets of flights of poetic fancy or inspiration. It's meant to be your daily life. Become aware, wake up, and return to yourself. Take a few moments to think on these things.
One question.
Yes. Swamiji, thank you for the talk. You were saying that we are here to enjoy God and love God.
Yes.
So I have a question about, is it something same, is the same meaning to moksha? So I've learned that we're here to get moksha, free from everything. And you also mentioned that, becoming observer and desire nothing, all these things, to just, enjoy God and to love God. For me, this is like I know it's a higher level you're talking about. This is one emotion that I can, I don't know. To get the moksha, we need to control or free from our five senses. All that kind of thing. Is it, I don't know, I just feel like I understand what you meant, but what if the word moksha that you may wants to mention?
Yes, well, Thakur, of course, is always talking about moksha, and it's part of that fun. It's part of the I guess, the paradox that we live in, because you have that already, but you don't know it. So what good is it to be a millionaire without knowing that you have any money? It's like, it doesn't do any good, but it's there nonetheless. And so Vivekananda, when he says to you, stop seeking God and see him or see her, he's not saying stop all of your efforts, but know that all of your efforts are coming from the fact that God already is. Live your spiritual life as if you're already free. Assume that freedom, assume that grace, assume that mercy, and let your life become a response to mercy and grace instead of a begging, searching, clawing for God or for something outside of you, something outside of yourself. When he says enjoy the mangoes, enjoy God, he's talking about looking within, which is what we were talking about, silencing everything else, because you can't actually look within, because even if you turned around and looked within, you'd still be the looker. So you'd be on the other side looking in then. So looking in isn't a matter of putting something in front of your senses. It's a matter of shutting down your senses and turning them into a sense for implication, a sense that feels intuition. And know that this self that's watching all of that exists and is ever free and is ever pure and is established in tranquility and is established in peace. And when you hear the mind argue, you say, look, that's the mind arguing. I'm just watching. The only thing that can be given that you see in this world is a thought. Everything is a thought. Even your senses, the information coming in through your senses, when you hear about it, when you see it, it's just a thought. It's happening within the mind, right? So know the nature of that. Assume God's love. Assume God's purity. Assume the existence of a oneness that is the whole, the one without a second. And enjoy that. And through that process, it will manifest. It will become more and more clear to you. As you start paying attention to that inner world, you'll see all of these little things to be true. You'll come to realize, wow, nothing material has ever touched me. It's touched my body. It's gone into my mind. But I've always been across that little chasm just watching the mind, which is why, for some reason, nothing out there has ever been satisfying. It always seems so short-lived. It's always so vapid and gone, And one day when you're laying on that deathbed, when you're laying there and you can no longer get out of one room, you can't even get out of the bed, what will you have with you? Will you have invested your life in things of the material that never were able to touch you or fulfill you? Or will you have learned to lay in contentment in that inner shrine, knowing your moksha, knowing your freedom, knowing the source of love, knowing the infinity of your being? So it's a preparation in a sense. And grace, the old age is that grace which God helps you with. He helps you to let go of the body by making it a thing you want to let go of.
That's also thoughts. So how do I know?
Yes, all of it is thought.
One reality become one, that God's reality and my reality. How do I know that if it's equal? I don't know how it's gonna happen, but how do I know if this is one thoughts? Obviously, there is a lot of thoughts, different level.
Yeah, well, still all thinking. Thinking's not necessary. Now, as Westerners, that's very alarming. We suddenly think, oh my gosh, you're going to turn me into a disabled person, It sits there drooling on myself, unable to think. What happens when you stop thinking is that God begins manifesting. That inner nature begins manifesting. Your pure intelligence comes out. Your pure love gets expressed. When you're doing, when you're thinking, when your ego is acting as the source of action, it's blocking, it's messing up. It's like somebody who doesn't know how to interpret, who's trying to interpret while the speaker is talking, and you reach a point where you're like, will you shut up and just let me listen to the speaker? It's like, stop getting in the way. That's what we're trying to do with ego. We're trying to get it to stop analyzing everything. We're trying to get it to stop telling us who we are and what we think about things and how we feel about things. And we're trying to come to that which is the natural self, which doesn't need to be told anything, but needs to be allowed to manifest. That's being in the flow. Anything with the ego is disturbance to that flow. So we want to remove that small sense of self, surrender to it. And how will you know? You'll know it in the same way when you see something beautiful. How did you know it was beautiful? Because it's your nature to know beauty. When you find that oneness inside, how will you know? In the same way you will know because it's your nature to know oneness. It will be obvious and apparent to you, but it has to be in stillness so that you can see it. Otherwise you'll be distracted by everything else going on. All right. I'm going to go out and hang out outside. If anybody wants to ask questions or chit-chat or anything, please feel free. Jai Ma, Jai Thakur, Jai Swamiji, Jai Jesus, Jai Buddha, Jai Rama, Jai Love.